Hi everybody, my name is Koen Sandsbrink. I work for the National Cybersecurity Center in the Netherlands. And today I want to talk to you a little bit about the authentication schemes we have in the Netherlands, together with a colleague, Joost van Dijk from SURF. And my bit comes first. It is about authentication on a national level. As the Dutch government, we offer an authentication scheme to citizens that is called DigiD in Dutch. It doesn't really pronounce anyway in English. DigiD, it's not working, but that's okay. It wasn't supposed to. That is an authentication scheme used for any government services, from local municipalities to central government, for driver's licenses, tax administration, everything. So this scheme uses multiple levels of security. The basic level is just username, password. Well, in this audience, I probably don't have to explain to anyone that just username and password for authentication for important things such as your taxes is not a good idea. Fortunately, that is barely used, and actually the tax administration forces users to use at least the second level of security, which expands on the username password with a one-time password over text message, which is a 6-digit code. Now, two-factor authentication is, of course, better, you would agree, than none at all, but text messages are really not that future-proof anymore. And for the future of DigiD, we are actually looking into using FIDO2 for authentication. At this moment, that is not the case yet. And for the highest level of security, we have a bespoke app for DigiD authentication, which is technically impressive. It uses an RFID scanner to scan your passport so you can identify yourself. But since it is a single app for a single authentication mechanism, and users will start to use many apps and other authentication mechanisms there, that's also not really future-proof. And the app is holding people back a little bit because it is a tiny bit too complicated, although I believe passwords are too complicated for a common user, but the app is not that popular in some parts of the user base. Now, the user base in our case is a little special. I have to admit something about the culture in the Netherlands. We are a bit cheap. And the problem with being cheap is if you start to enable your business online, that means offline equivalents will get cut out very soon. And this is a problem also for government services in the Netherlands. It is actually not very surprising if you live in a very rural area that if you want to physically go to your town hall to do something as in person, you wouldn't be surprised if the opening hours of the local town hall are very, very limited. This is a result of the fact that most things can be done online, but not everyone will want to go online or even is able to go online. Our demography includes people of all ages and literacy levels, and they are not as well exercised in using online systems. Now, users come in a variety of levels, and when I started working in security and I started studying phishing a bit, one thing I learned back then was that some people Google for login pages. And back in the day, that was 2007, and I thought, well, those users must be quite stupid. Well, actually, I learned over the years that you shouldn't call users stupid. That's the first thing. But also, users who Google for login pages are not actually that stupid. Now, Googling for a login page, it happens for DigiD as well. It's the same issue. But when I started working for a private company, but when I moved my work to government, at that point, I started talking to the people at DigiD, and they told me something very interesting, that people are not just Googling for a login page, but they are actually, some people, they type their username and password for DigiD into Google. That is a whole new level of user creativity. I'm not sure if those people also actually hit the I'm feeling lucky button, because I get a feeling that they are feeling lucky when they type their password into Google. But this means that when renewing our authentication mechanism, we really need to think it over very carefully. And of course, we believe FIDO is the future, an open standard, and just the technical implementation is not really the main issue here. The main issue is to make it really very usable for all users. And that means that we have to think of all kinds of exceptions and edge cases and very creative users and how they would deal with the system. Now, eventually, we hope to get a system that will replace the password authentication mechanism. But before we can, we have to learn from a lot of experiences from other users, other organizations implementing FIDO2. So at this point, I'd like to hand this over to Joost, who will share his experiences as SURF is a major partner of the NCSC. We are very happy to also learn from their experiences in their authentication program. So over to you, Joost.
Thank you, Koen. So my name is Joost van Dijk. I work as a technical product manager at SURF. And SURF is the shared IT organization for universities and research institutes in the Netherlands. I've been working in identity for the last decade, and one of the things I've been working on is introducing multi-factor authentication for our population of students and researchers. So in this presentation, I would like to tell you about our experiences in developing this service to our customers, and well, the lessons learned in doing so. So let me start off with telling you about the main service that we've been developing since 2007. It's called SURFconext. It's an identity federation. It consists currently of 180 identity providers and more than 1,000 service providers. And it provides single sign-on to our member universities. It is based on SAML 2.0 and OpenID Connect. And it's being used by 1.7 million people in the Netherlands, all working in higher education and research. It's maybe good to mention that SURF is actually owned by our members, because we are an association, a collaborative association, and as such, we're like a trusted third party. And that's important to realize if you look at the architecture that I'll zoom into in just a moment. So this has been operational since 2007 and growing. But with this growth, we've also seen more and more security-sensitive applications being connected to our federation. And well, this is a bit of a challenge, because most of our universities, they have only password authentication. So that's the reason why we've been trying to introduce multi-factor authentication to our member organizations. And that's actually not so easy, because there are many different organizations. They have different technologies that they use to hook up to our federation. And also they have many different kinds of users. So not only students, researchers, but also staff and all kinds of users with different requirements and abilities. So our Identity Federation has been very popular with lots of people using it. But for introducing stronger authentication, we needed to have to be creative. So we implemented this by using an add-on service. We're calling it SURFconext. And it's a hosted solution, meaning that we provide the second factor authentication to our users. So the idea is that users, they authenticate at their home university using a password. And before they are redirected to the service provider, they are redirected to us, where we require a second factor before sending them off to the service they initially requested. So this process is called Stepup Authentication. It involves increasing the so-called level of assurance of authentication. And we do this by using different methods for the second factor, because students, they don't want to buy any expensive tokens, but the free tokens are usually not secure enough for the administrators that need real tight security. We implemented this by using a modular system that can introduce arbitrary authentication factors before sending a user back to the service provider. Initially, we supported 3 different kinds of authentication. So the first one is SMS, because it's easy, well, maybe not easy, but it's ubiquitous. It is available to anyone. We also use YubiKeys, so the one-time password function of a YubiKey. This is because it's really secure, because it uses secure hardware. And then we also have a mobile application that we developed called Ticker, which implements challenge response authentication using push messages. So initially we had these 3 methods, and recently we introduced new methods. One of them is to integrate with Azure multi-factor authentication, but also we use now FIDO2 security keys. And this is really nice because this is the first method that we're introducing that doesn't rely on shared secrets, which is kind of hard to secure. And also because it protects against phishing. And phishing is one of the attacks we see which is increasing, especially last year since the COVID crisis. We've seen a lot of phishing campaigns launched against our users, and we see FIDO2 as an excellent way to mitigate this threat. So let me zoom in on how this exactly works. So we've implemented an IDP proxy that performs this step-up authentication, and it sits in between the IDP and SP. So this is a very convenient way of introducing this multi-factor authentication to our users, because it doesn't require any support from IDPs and SPs. And that's because we have so many different systems implementing these IDPs and SPs that it's very hard to find a greatest common denominator. So the benefit of this solution is that the IDP nor the SP actually need to know that step-up authentication is being performed. So we can configure the second factor independently of IDPs and SPs. And this way we can gradually introduce this multi-factor authentication into our federation. So a few words on what we're doing with FIDO2. We've actually implemented U2F a couple of years ago, but that was lacking browser support, which prevented us from bringing this into production. But that has all changed now with browser support for basically all vendors that are used in our federation. We still use only the U2F functionality, so only the second factor. We don't require user verification, just user presence. So we just verify that people push a button so that it cannot be automated. But we don't use the second factor features of FIDO2 itself, just the second factor feature. We do require device attestation, so we can see that there's actually secure hardware being used and not some software implementation, because that's required for the higher level of authentication or higher levels of assurance that we're requiring. And as I said, this is very, very interesting for protecting against phishing and to make it also more user-friendly to perform this multi-factor authentication. There are, however, a couple of remaining challenges. One is the non-web clients. So our service is being used, for example, by universities that have adopted Office 365. So there's actually users that use clients like Microsoft Word or Excel to perform the second factor. That doesn't quite work yet with FIDO2 security keys because the web authentication API that is required is lacking from some of these browsers or some of these clients. So not the browsers, but the non-web clients. Also, there's not many FIDO authenticators that are being that have been certified on level 2, which means that they have restricted operating environments. So using hardware-backed security keys. But we think this will change in the near future. So this is also very interesting because we would like to know exactly what type of authenticator a user is using. Another challenge is remote vetting, because one of the ways that we define our levels of assurance is by doing a face-to-face authentication with our users. And the way this is implemented is by using a delegation model. So because we have an intimate relationship with our universities, we actually know the people that are responsible for authentication there. So how this works is that we do the identity vetting for these people at the universities, and they delegate it further down the organization to departments and even smaller units, where they are responsible for the identity vetting of their own users. So this is a hierarchical model that we're using all the way down the organizational structure of the universities. But the face-to-face identification is a challenge now that we're dealing with COVID, because everyone working from home, that makes it rather difficult. So we're now piloting a remote identity vetting procedure by reusing identity vetting from other organizations. So currently we're looking at 3 different methods. One is Read ID, that is an application that can read your passport. And so if your passport has a chip that contains identity information that is issued by the government, we can actually read this information and make sure that it is genuine, and compare it with the attributes that we obtain from SAML assertions from the identity provider. We can do the same with banks. There's a system called IDIN that is introduced in the Netherlands a couple of years ago. And the banks have a requirement of doing a face-to-face vetting with their customers. So we can reuse that by launching an identification with the IDIN system, which is actually a SAML-based federation in itself. Also, there's a very interesting project that is actually initiated by one of our universities. It's called IRMA. It's a self-sovereign identity based on attribute-based credentials. And they have connected with the government DigiD that Koen was talking about. And it's actually possible to have government-issued credentials on this IRMA system. And because the government does identity vetting itself, we can now reuse that using this IRMA system. So I've provided links to these technologies. If you're interested, you just follow those links and you'll can read more about it. So to sum up, what we've done is, I think we have shown that we can actually scale this multi-factor authentication on a national level. Of course, the Netherlands is not that big a country, but with 17 million people, for us it's fairly large scale. Also, I think that FIDO is very good news for our community because of protection against phishing attacks. And I think that identity vetting is very important, especially for some services that have some special laws that require identity vetting. And this has also always been a problem for doing this on a large scale. And I think we've shown that we can actually scale this to a national level by using a delegation model. All right, thank you for joining us today. If you have any questions, you can contact me at info@surf.nl.
Yes, and for me at info@ncsc.nl. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for your attention. And I think we still have some time left for questions, either for me or for Koen.